This story is absolutely insane. So I just read this book, Endurance, about the ship the Endurance and Ernest Shackleton, which is just one of the craziest stories I've ever heard. So Ernest Shackleton decides he wants to go to Antarctica. Over 100 years ago, 1814, he decided to go to Antarctica, okay? No one had ever been across the entire continent before. He's gonna try it, and he's gonna try it with 28 different men. And their whole plan is to stop somewhere. They're all by themselves on their one ship, the Endurance, and then they're gonna travel across the whole thing and meet up with a ship on the other side of the continent. Super risky. This is absolutely crazy. Ernest Shackleton was known as a risk taker, as the ultimate optimist. This guy believed he could do anything he set his mind to. And that included trying to make an insane expedition across Antarctica before anyone else had done it. So he's able to get some backers. He even gets the British government to fund it. They're about to leave. World War I kicks off. Everyone just thinks the war's going to only last like a couple months, maybe. So they say, you and all your ocean-faring men, go ahead and go to Antarctica. This will be awesome. This is the height of the age of exploration, by the way. This is every single adventurer possible is having these amazing explorations and adventures during this time period, and Ernest Shackleton wants to be a part of it. So what does he do? He's able to get this ship. It's one of the last ones built out of wood. Ships at this point are starting to be made out of steel, which is much stronger. However, it acts differently in Antarctica because of the cold, because of all these icebergs and sheets of ice. And so because of this, he decides he wants to go with what he knows. He goes with this wooden hulled ship. They made it super thick, a couple feet thick worth of wood, in hopes that the ice would not crush it, but that it would be able to plow through these big ice packs near Antarctica. They set sail and they get down to the furthest point that they can possibly be to see other people. And then they set off in hopes of being able to get to Antarctica. In pretty good progress, they're smashing through the ice packs. But pretty soon they notice that they have to get out. They have to break apart the ice by hand in Antarctica, freezing weather, even though they're doing it during the summertime to make it a little bit easier. After not that long, they get stuck and they can't get unstuck. Imagine you're in Antarctica. It's negative something degrees. You're stuck in the ice. They have a preliminary type of radio to receive communications, but this is so early on you can't send them. So they have no ability to talk to the outside world at all. They are fully on their own. Try and chip their way out of the ice, but there's just no hope. The ship is just stuck. It's stuck firm in this ice pack. So there's 28 men and a whole bunch of dogs that they were planning on using on sledding across Antarctica to get to the other side. However, eventually this ice pack just starts compressing and compressing the ship. They start hearing cracks. Ship for a decent amount of time, but they continue to hear the cracking and the bending. Actually, Ernest Shackleton has to say, okay, everybody, we're gonna get off the ship just for our safety. We're gonna get all of the equipment that we can off of it. And then hopefully the ice pack loosens up and we're able to go. But it just keeps getting worse and eventually starts really crushing the ship, and they know there's no saving it. So they try and get more stuff off, and every now and again they'll come back and they'll try and get more off, and they're just on this big giant pack of ice, a few football fields in size. And this becomes their home for a very long time. Eventually, the ship breaks apart so much that they can't get anything else from it, and it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. It was only recently found in 2022. But before the ship sinks, they took 3 lifeboats, which are about 20 feet long and have sails. So their hope is that they can now move from where they are to the furthest point of the ice pack, get onto these boats, and sail back to where they came from on this small island with all of these whalers and seal hunters. But this expedition is hundreds of miles away to be able to get there. Meanwhile, they still have to cross massive amounts of ice by foot. And the thing with ice packs is it's not all flat, because each one is butted up against each other. There's giant icebergs in the mix that's constantly moving around. There's huge ridges and valleys and crevasses they have to traverse. So they're trying to make it through. They're trying to move, but they can only get like a mile before they give up. A mile from where they were before. And they just set up camp there. It's on a little bit bigger of a pack, so that's good. But these men are starting to eat through all their rations pretty fast. It has been months by this point. And so they've been hunting penguins, they've been hunting seals, and they've been able to do that. But there's no wood. So how are you cooking things? How are you lighting fires? With the blubber from the seals they catch. But because this is such a finite resource, only used for cooking, the rest of the time they're freezing cold. However, in the summertime, because of their tents, the areas around their tent melts and they're just in water all the time and it's freezing water. Eventually they decide to try and move a little bit further to see if they can get to the edge of the ice pack. So they try it and they get a little bit further, about 9 miles from where the ship went down, before they just can't go any further. The ice pack is too thick. There's too many ridges. There's too many crevasses. They can't get any further and they just have to stay. Meanwhile, this whole time, they're trying to figure out how to survive. They're going hunting. They're trying to find food. Everything's freezing cold. A lot of the men are actually pretty joyful because of how Ernest Shackleton, how optimistic he is. They really believe that this guy is going to get them out of it. But as time goes on, they start to really feel worse and worse. And even Ernest Shackleton starts to feel like he's losing hope. As time goes on, as seasons change, they start to run out of food. They start to feel like there's nothing. Eventually, they have to kill their dogs and eat them. And it was a really hard thing for a lot of these men. Besides the fact that dogs are man's best friend, these guys have been living with these dogs for a year now. And so it was really difficult for these guys to have to go and take care of these dogs. There's almost no blubber left. They haven't seen seals in a while because as the seasons change, as it gets colder, the seals leave. And so they haven't been able to see seals, which means they're running out of blubber to light their fires to be able to cook their food. And when all hope seems lost, when everything seems like it's going to go away, one of the men is trying to hunt for some penguins. As he's going out, he hears something smashing through the ice. 15-foot, 1,000-pound leopard seal bursts out of the water. Massive maw that tries to envelop him. He starts trying to run away, but he's on skis. So he's kind of waddling a little bit like a penguin, which is probably why this leopard seal thought that he was a penguin, just a big one. What does he know? He's a 15-foot leopard seal. Everything's a penguin to him. Well, this leopard seal starts trying to chase him and is actually pretty fast on the ice. But then it bursts down into the ice, pops up in front of him. He starts running back and he's screaming bloody murder, hoping that somebody hears him to save him because there's no way he's getting away from this leopard seal. Eventually, somebody shoots this leopard seal and now they have more than enough blubber and food to survive for even more months. Desperate situation, they're like, how are we going to get out of this? We're stuck in this ice pack, which is 100 miles wide before we get to open water. How are we going to get through? Every now and again, they try and move a little bit further. Ice is shrinking. The ice packs themselves are smaller. But because of this ice pack, it is floating on the water. They can't feel the water movement underneath them because of how packed tightly it is, hence ice pack. But they're slowly floating towards their destination north. The problem is that they're not floating necessarily that fast. They're going in the right direction, sort of. After months and months and months, 400 or so days, they finally are far enough north that they're no longer in the Antarctic Circle. Ice pack is starting to separate. However, because of this separation, the ice pack is smashing together. Each giant individual football field sized piece of ice is smashing together and breaking, which means a couple times the men fall in. Thankfully, they're rescued by their comrades. 3 boats and 28 men, and they have to figure out how to survive this. And they're trying to figure out at what point do we just get into the water, because now there's water, but the ocean is terrible and they're stuck in this ice pack, which keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Time they decide to put their boats in the water, it's half a football field in size. And eventually they decide to go for it. They start heading to the direction of what they hope to be a little village full of whalers and seal hunters. It's still hundreds of miles away, 800 miles away near. However, they've been pushed in a completely wrong direction, and they realize this and decide that they're going to try and go to Elephant Island, which is an island uninhabited that no one's actually stepped foot on before. They just know that it's really terrible and has super high cliffs. But they have no other options, and they're on these boats. They're running low on water because now the ocean has opened up and there's no more ice, which means there's no place for them to try and get more water. Meanwhile, this ocean is some of the worst ocean in the world. It's some of the most dangerous ocean out there. There's no land to break up how big these waves get. So these waves can easily get 30 or 40 feet. The US Navy regularly tries to avoid this region of the world because of how dangerous it is for modern ships, let alone 100 years ago. Well, miracle after miracle has occurred for them, and it has not stopped yet. They eventually end up on Elephant Island on a little tiny spit of land. Their ship's nearly sinking half a dozen times, but they made it. However, they realize this is not a great place to be. The entire thing is covered in bird poop and it stinks. There is a small glacier nearby, so they now have fresh water and there's penguins to eat. But it's still not a great situation, and they're still barely closer to getting back home. Well, Ernest Shackleton and a few men decide that they're going to try and make it on their own. One of the lifeboats is better than the other two, and so they're going to take that one, and they're going to try and get to this tiny little speck of an island these whalers have their base. Please take a moment and just hit that subscribe button if you've been enjoying this video so far. So they set out, tell the men that are staying behind, if we're gone for more than a month, assume we're dead. They're going. They nearly die half a dozen times, but these miracles continue. One thing that you can say about Ernest Shackleton and the story of the Endurance is that miracles happen to him over and over and over again. Eventually, they make it back to the island that they need to get to, but they're on the wrong side of the island. They would have to travel even further, and there's no way they can do it. A couple of the men that are with them are nearly dying, so they leave them on this little tiny bit of beach that they found in this cave, and Ernest Shackleton and two other men decide they're gonna climb 5,000 feet in elevation, nearly straight up and down constantly, some of the worst terrain in the world on this island, to try and get back to the little village that hopefully is still occupied. They're going, they slide down hundreds of feet in elevation sometimes on these ice packs when they decide there's no way for them to climb down. Their strength is draining. This has been over a year, well over a year, over 400 days of them being exhausted in the Antarctic in horrible conditions. Well, eventually these men make it back to this little tiny village. They go and they pick up the other men who are weak on the other side of the island, and they make a bunch of attempts to go to Elephant Island to save their crew. Ships keep getting damaged, or terrible weather prevents them from being able to make it. Eventually, however, they do. They start sailing over, and they're getting there. Meanwhile, these men on this island, they haven't seen Shackleton in well over a month. It's been months, and they're thinking, you know, maybe it's about time that we're going to have to start trying to set sail again and just see what happens. Well, one day, ship sails into the harbor. A boat lowers. Who's at the head of that ship? It's Ernest Shackleton, come to save his men. All of them abandon all their stuff, things that they cared so much about for so long. He goes and he rescues them. They get back to England, and you know what happens? All 28 men survive. Insane odyssey. All 28 men survive this. And what's even crazier, so all 28 of these men survive. They go off and they fight in World War I. And then when the Bolsheviks take over Russia and the war ends, many of the men, including Ernest Shackleton, go and help in the Russian expeditions. They know how to work in ice. Well, just a few years later, Ernest Shackleton decides he wants to head back down to Antarctica. However, because of a heart condition that he started having problems with on this expedition, he ends up passing away on the same island he was rescued on just a few years before. Many of these men continued working, going down to Antarctica, serving in the Navy. Many of them even served in World War II. It's honestly one of the most miraculous stories, because if you actually look at history, oftentimes every single year is marked by another sinking of an amazing ship. And yet this time, nobody died. Not a single person died on this whole ship. How crazy is that? Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe for more.